My nephew's mistaken text message uncovered my family's plot to steal my inheritance in Mark, and until recently, I thought my family was just a little bit unfair. Nothing too extreme, just the usual favoritism toward my older sister, Sarah, 40F. She and her husband, Tom, 39M, have always been the golden couple, 2 perfect kids, Liam, 17M, and Sophie, 15F, a big house, fancy vacations, and the full, unconditional support of our parents. Me? I took a different route. I run a small business, I'm single, and I don't have kids. My life is stable, comfortable, and drama-free. At least it was. I never felt the need to compete with Sarah, and I didn't care much about being the less accomplished son. But as I recently found out, it was never just about favoritism. They weren't just doting on Sarah, they were actively screwing me over. And the only reason I found out was a text message from my nephew. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was at home watching TV when my phone buzzed. A message from Liam. Uncle Mark hasn't figured it out yet, has he? I don't think he suspects anything. I stared at my phone for a second, confused. Before I could even type a response, the message disappeared unsent. A second later, another text popped up. Sorry, wrong person. Ignore that. Now, I'm not the type to overthink things, but something about it felt off. Liam and I have always gotten along well. He's a good kid, definitely more aware than his parents give him credit for, but this wasn't just a typo or a random mistake. I asked him, "What was that about?" He replied almost immediately, "Nothing, just a mix-up. Ignore me." I let it go for the moment, but that uneasy feeling didn't go away. A week later, we had our usual Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I walked in, greeted everyone as usual, and sat down at the dining table. That's when I noticed something strange. Whenever I spoke, my parents, Sarah and Tom, kept exchanging glances, not the normal kind either. These were quick, nervous looks, like they were waiting for me to bring something up. I hadn't mentioned Liam's weird text to anyone, but their reaction made it clear there was something they didn't want me to know. Tom got up in the middle of dinner to take a phone call. He stepped into the next room, but I could still hear him whispering, "We just need a little more time before he finds out." That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention. Later that evening, my cousin Lisa pulled me aside and, out of nowhere, said, "Man, if you knew what your parents have been up to, you'd flip." I pressed her for details, but she just laughed it off and changed the subject. Then there was Sophie, my niece, who casually mentioned something about that house while talking to my parents. I asked, "What house?" and the entire room went silent. Tom quickly stepped in, laughing nervously. "Oh, just an old family thing. Nothing important." That's when it hit me. My grandparents had left behind a house years ago. It was supposed to belong to both Sarah and me after they passed. I never heard anything else about it at the time. I assumed my parents were handling it. But now, I wasn't so sure. I went home that night and started digging. I don't usually go through old paperwork, but this time, something told me to check. I went through my files and found a bank statement I didn't recognize. My name was listed alongside Sarah's on an account I had no knowledge of. The transactions made no sense: large withdrawals, money being moved around, and, most suspiciously, an old deposit labeled property sale. I didn't remember selling any property. I called my mom the next morning and casually asked if she knew anything about an account with my name on it. Her tone changed instantly. "It's not something you need to worry about," she said, trying to brush it off, but I could hear the unease in her voice. That was all the confirmation I needed. A friend of mine works in real estate. I asked him if he could check property records for my grandparents' old house. It had been sold without my knowledge. I had never signed anything, never agreed to sell, but somehow my name was on the paperwork. A real estate contact later told me that a third-party notary had confirmed my signature. Someone had impersonated me. Someone had forged my name. I confronted Sarah first. I showed her the documents and asked her when exactly we had agreed to sell the house. She barely even tried to deny it. It was complicated. You weren't really in a place to take care of it, she said. That was her justification that I wasn't in a place to make decisions about my own inheritance. That night, Liam called me. He was crying. I thought you already knew. I didn't mean to say anything, he admitted. He said that his parents and my parents had been keeping this from me. He didn't know all the details, just that they had sold something that belonged to me and were hoping I wouldn't find out. He felt guilty. I reassured him that none of this was his fault. He was the only reason I had figured any of this out. Then my real estate friend sent me the final piece of proof, the sale agreement, my name forged. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just unfair treatment. They stole from me. When I finally confronted my parents about it, they didn't even deny it. Sarah has kids to take care of, and we thought, as a family, we had to prioritize the people who needed it most, they said. That was their excuse that Sarah needed the money more than I did, so they just took what was mine. They expected me to let it go. They expected me to be okay with it. But they underestimated me because now I had proof, and I wasn't letting this go. Sarah and my parents thought they could just sweep this under the rug. They thought I'd be too passive to do anything about it. They were wrong, because at the next family dinner, I walked in, set the documents down in front of them, and said, "When exactly were you going to tell me you stole my inheritance?" And that was when the real chaos started. Sunday dinner was always a big deal in my family. Every week, like clockwork, we all gathered at my parents' house for a meal that was supposed to be about togetherness. This time, though, I wasn't there for small talk. I walked in like usual, greeting everyone, pretending nothing was different. Sarah and Tom were already sitting at the table, laughing about something, while my parents fussed over the food. Liam and Sophie were on their phones. Just another Sunday, except it wasn't. The moment everyone sat down, I pulled out the real estate documents and placed them in the center of the table. The room went dead silent. I asked one question. When exactly were you all going to tell me you stole my inheritance? My mother was the first to react. She didn't even look at the papers, just shook her head and sighed like I had brought up something embarrassing. "Why are you bringing this up now? This is family business," she said. Sarah didn't even look at the documents at first. She reached for her drink, completely unfazed, while Tom gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind he always used when he wanted to act like the reasonable one in the room. "Mark, let's not do this here. This is supposed to be a nice dinner," he said. My father stayed quiet, staring at his plate. Sarah finally glanced down at the paperwork for a second. Her face was completely blank. Then I pointed to her name on the forged signature. Her expression changed instantly. She sat up straighter, clearing her throat. "This isn't what you think," she said. Tom immediately jumped in, acting like this was all some big misunderstanding. "Mark, you have a good life. Do you really want to tear this family apart over money?" "Not over money," I said. "Over theft." That's when Sophie, completely unaware of how much damage had already been done, blurted out, "I thought we were waiting until next year to tell him." The entire room froze. Tom shot her a look so sharp she instantly clammed up, turning pale as she realized what she had just said. I leaned back in my chair. "So you were planning on telling me?" "When?" "After you spent all the money?" My father, who had been silent up until this point, finally sighed and set down his fork. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "We sold the house," he said. No denial, no excuses. Just a matter-of-fact statement like it was just another piece of family business. "We did what needed to be done," he continued. "Sarah has kids to take care of. You don't." That was their justification because Sarah had kids. She was entitled to my share of the inheritance. I looked at them, all of them. My mother, who was acting like I was making a scene. My father, who had already accepted that he had done something unforgivable. Sarah, who still looked too smug for someone caught red-handed, and Tom, who was trying to hold everything together with fake sympathy. I called them thieves. My mother gasped like I had just cursed in church. Tom reached for Sarah's arm, whispering something under his breath, but Sarah just leaned back in her chair and smirked. "What are you going to do about it?" she actually said, as if she knew they had me backed into a corner, as if she knew they thought I wouldn't dare escalate this. That's when I told them I was hiring a lawyer. My mother clutched her chest like I had physically hurt her. "You're going to ruin this family," she said. Dad's face turned red. He slammed his hand on the table, standing up, furious. "You think some lawyer is going to fix this? You think tearing this family apart over some house is worth it?" Tom turned on Sarah, snapping at her under his breath, probably realizing just how badly she had handled the situation. Liam got up so fast his chair scraped against the floor, running upstairs in tears. Sophie just sat there, eyes darting between all of us, clearly trying to process how fast this family dinner had turned into a war zone. Sarah didn't say anything for a few seconds, just staring at me. Then, finally, her smirk faded. She got up, tossed her napkin onto her plate, and walked out of the dining room like she was the one who had been wronged. Tom followed her a second later, still whispering angrily at her. My mother wiped at her eyes, whispering something about how she couldn't believe I would do this. I stood up, grabbed my documents, and looked directly at them. "No, you ruined this family the second you decided I didn't matter." Then I walked out. By the time I got home, my phone was already blowing up text after text, some from extended family, some from family friends, some from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Some called me selfish, saying I should just let it go. Others told me they had suspected something shady was going on for years. A few sided with me, especially after I sent screenshots of the documents, but most of them just didn't want to be involved. And then there were the messages from my parents. "Mom, I can't believe you would do this to us. Dad, fix this now before it's too late. Sarah, you're making a mistake. Tom, we can talk about this like adults." I ignored every single one. They had spent years making sure I never knew the truth. Now they were panicking because I did, and they still had no idea how far I was willing to go to make things right. Sarah thought this was over. She thought I was bluffing. She was wrong. The next morning, I sat in a lawyer's office with a folder full of documents. My real estate contact had helped me pull up the property records, the forged sale agreement, and the bank statements linked to my name. My lawyer flipped through everything, barely speaking, until he reached the signature page. He tapped the forged signature and immediately pointed it out. "This is fraud," he said. That was all I needed to hear. He walked me through my options, explaining that not only was this a civil case, but it could also have criminal implications. There was no gray area. My name had been used illegally, and money that rightfully belonged to me had been stolen. I wasted no time. I told him I wanted to move forward. He started drafting the paperwork immediately. With the legal wheels turning, I sent a single text to Sarah. I spoke with a lawyer. Less than 5 minutes later, Sarah replied, "You can't prove anything." The idiot had just incriminated herself. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my lawyer. He chuckled and added it to the file. Not long after, Tom called. The tone was completely different from before. Gone was the smugness from Sunday dinner. Now he was in full damage control mode. He spoke carefully, trying to sound reasonable, throwing out phrases like family misunderstanding, and let's handle this privately, and we can work something out. I let him talk. Then, when he was done, I told him it was too late. He hung up. That's when my parents switched tactics. They must have realized that ignoring me wasn't working, so they went for the guilt trip approach. My mom started reaching out to relatives, twisting the story. She told them I was trying to tear the family apart over a little money. She called me ungrateful, saying that my parents had done everything for me, and this was how I repaid them. Then came the messages. Some relatives echoed her words, telling me to drop it. Others were more careful, asking what was going on. A few, the ones who actually wanted to know the truth, switched sides once I showed them the documents. The family divide had started. Then a family friend reached out. "I heard what's going on," he said. "I figured you should know this isn't the first time Sarah has done something like this." That caught my attention. Apparently, Sarah had a history of shady financial moves. Nothing on this scale, but she'd borrowed money from relatives before and forgotten to pay it back. She'd convinced one of our aunts to invest in a business idea that mysteriously fell through, but Sarah still walked away with a new car a few months later. This wasn't just about my inheritance. Sarah had been using people for years. I took that information straight to my lawyer. That's when we dug into the bank account, the one with my name on it that I never opened. My lawyer told me to report it, and within 24 hours, a fraud investigation was opened. The bank was legally required to look into it, which meant Sarah and my parents were officially in trouble. The next day, Liam sent me a text. "I want to help." He said he'd been keeping quiet because Tom had told him not to get involved, but he knew what they did to me was wrong. He told me he was willing to testify if I needed him to. I told him I wouldn't ask him to do that unless he was absolutely sure. He didn't hesitate. He said. While I was processing that, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Sarah, but she hadn't meant to send it to me. "We need to fix this before it gets worse," it said. It was meant for Tom. I read it twice, then took a screenshot and sent it straight to my lawyer. I didn't respond to Sarah. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I called my lawyer and told him my final decision. I was taking them to court. Sarah must have realized the legal case against her was getting serious because, instead of preparing a defense, she went on the attack. She started spreading rumors that I was only suing because I was broke and desperate for money. She made sure to tell everyone that this was just a cash grab, not an actual betrayal. At first, it was subtle. A few relatives started acting differently toward me, sending awkward texts asking if everything was okay. Then it got worse. My mom, true to form, started calling every family member she could reach, making it seem like she was the real victim in all of this. She went on about how much she and my dad had sacrificed for me, and how I was repaying them by trying to destroy the family over something that wasn't even a big deal. Some relatives took their side immediately. Others weren't so sure. That's when my inbox started filling up with messages. Some supportive, some aggressive. A few cousins reached out directly, clearly torn. They asked me if the rumors were true. "Are you really suing because you need the money?" I sent them screenshots of the forged paperwork, the bank statements, the property records. The reaction was immediate. Some of them switched sides right away. They had assumed this was just a petty financial dispute, but seeing actual proof of fraud that changed things. Then Liam texted me. "They're freaking out. Mom and Dad are arguing over how to handle you." Tom and Sarah weren't on the same page. Tom wanted to find a way to settle this quietly. Sarah wanted to play hardball. My mom, she was somewhere in the middle, trying to keep up the illusion of a perfect family while whispering in Sarah's ear that I was just going through something and would drop it eventually. Then, a new development. One night, I got home late from work and found an unmarked envelope at my doorstep, no return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. It was a printed email exchange from years ago. Sarah had emailed a lawyer, asking how to remove someone's name from an inheritance without them knowing. Sarah had been planning this for a long time. I had no idea who sent me the letter, but it was exactly what I needed. I took it straight to my lawyer. He barely even blinked before adding it to the case file. Then my real estate contact came through with another bombshell. Sarah and Tom had flipped my grandparents' house for a hefty profit. They sold it months after forging my signature, then reinvested the money elsewhere. I had assumed they just took my share for personal use, but they hadn't just stolen the house, they made money off of it too. Then Liam came through with the final nail in the coffin. He had access to the family iPad, the one his parents used when they thought no one was listening. He was using it one day when he found an old voice memo his parents must have forgotten to delete. Sarah's voice, clear as day. Mark is too stupid to figure this out. By the time he does, it won't matter. He sent me the recording. I sent it to my lawyer. His reaction was instant. This isn't just fraud. This is a slam dunk. That's when Tom suddenly changed his approach. He called me, acting calm, reasonable. We should talk this out like adults, he said. He suggested a family meeting, no lawyers, no drama, just a mature conversation. I ignored the call. Then my mom texted, "We're still family. Do you really want to drag us through court?" Sarah, on the other hand, wasn't trying to be reasonable at all. She called me, furious. "You have no idea what you're messing with. Back off before you regret it." I hung up without a word. Then, the next morning, I officially filed the lawsuit. The reaction was immediate. Relatives who had stayed neutral now had to pick a side. Some doubled down, insisting that this should have been handled privately. Others cut contact with Sarah and my parents completely, disgusted by what they had done. But Sarah, for the first time, she was starting to realize she wasn't in control anymore, and now she was panicking. The lawsuit became public knowledge faster than I expected. Word spread through the family like wildfire. At first, it was just whispers in the group chats, messages asking if it was true, if I was really suing my own family. Then it escalated. Relatives started taking sides. Some called me, saying they understood why I was doing this. Others accused me of betraying the family, acting like I was some kind of outsider instead of the person who had been robbed. The family chat exploded. One message stood out: "Blood is thicker than money. I can't believe you're doing this. My mother played the victim perfectly." She sent long, dramatic messages about how she was just an old woman trying to keep the family together, and how I was tearing everything apart over money. How could my own son do this to me? That line popped up in at least 3 different chats. But fewer people were buying it. The moment I sent screenshots of the forged documents, some of those same relatives started backtracking. Then Tom switched tactics. He sent me an email. "We made mistakes. Let's settle this privately." Translation: they were scared. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer. Then came the next bombshell. My lawyer called after doing a deeper financial investigation. He had found another account, one that had both Sarah and my father's names on it. This one had thousands of dollars in it, money that had been siphoned out of my inheritance right after. After I got that call, Liam texted me again. "I just heard Dad say if Mark finds out about the other account, we're done." They were still hiding things. Then my real estate contact got back to me. Sarah and Tom hadn't just stolen the house and flipped it for a profit. They had used part of the money to put a down payment on their vacation home. I sent everything to my lawyer. His response: "This isn't just fraud, it's criminal." Sarah's confidence cracked over the following weeks. First, she was suspended from work. Then, Tom stopped defending her. By the time she called me, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. For the first time, there was no smugness, no arrogance. She begged me to drop the case. "We can fix this." "You don't have to do this," she said. I said nothing. I let her talk herself in circles, waiting for her to say something incriminating. She did. It was just a business decision. "We thought it was the best thing for the family," she said. I asked her one question. "Why didn't you think I was part of that family?" Dead silence. Then she hung up. Shortly after, my dad tried his own version of damage control. He finally spoke up, acting like this was all just a misunderstanding. "We just did what was best for the family," he said. I asked him the same question. Why didn't that family include me? He had no answer. Then my uncle reached out. "You should know, this isn't the first time they've helped Sarah pull something shady," he said. He had receipts. Turns out my parents had covered for Sarah before. She had been in financial trouble multiple times, and every time, my parents had quietly bailed her out using family money, using my grandparents' money. More cousins started cutting ties. Some still defended Sarah, saying, It's just money, but others had seen enough. Then Liam sent me another text. I can't stand being in this house anymore. He had been the only person in that house who had done the right thing, and now he was paying for it. Then came the final hit. Someone leaked details of the lawsuit to Sarah's workplace. Sarah worked in finance. Her entire job relied on trust and credibility. Suddenly, her name was circulating in the wrong circles. Clients were asking questions. Tom lost it. He called me, screaming, "You're ruining our lives." I didn't say anything. I just hung up. My response, "Good." The lawsuit was officially moving forward. A court date was set. My lawyer was confident everything was lining up against Sarah and my parents. Sarah must have realized just how deep she was in because, out of nowhere, she tried to settle through her lawyer. She made an offer less than half of what I was owed. I didn't even entertain it. My lawyer sent back a clear response. "We're going to court." Then another major blow. The bank that allowed the forged signature admitted their mistake. They launched an internal investigation, which meant more official documentation confirming fraud. Now there was no denying it. Then Tom flipped. He must have seen the writing on the wall because he immediately distanced himself from Sarah. He told anyone who would listen that he wasn't involved and that my parents were the masterminds. At first, no one believed him, but then Sarah's job got involved. Someone at her firm must have caught wind of the lawsuit because an internal review was launched. Sarah was suspended pending investigation. That's when my mother started doubling down. She made the rounds in the family, crying to anyone who would listen. She called aunts, uncles, distant cousins, anyone who might be on her side, and told them I was destroying the family. "He's ruining us," she said. But there was one problem. She had played this card too many times before. People were starting to see through it. Meanwhile, Sarah's assets were being frozen, her vacation home gone, her investments tied up in legal red tape. For the first time, Sarah couldn't just weasel her way out of trouble. Then the family meltdown got worse. My dad stopped answering my calls. He completely checked out. At a family gathering, my mom refused to even look at me. She sat in the corner, playing the victim, while the rest of the family awkwardly avoided the subject. Then, Liam made his own decision. He packed his bags and moved out. He left a note for Tom that said, "I can't stand being part of this anymore." Tom was too busy saving himself to care. Then, Sarah's lawyer quit. Once he saw the forged documents, the bank investigation, and the recorded confession from Liam, he walked away from the case. Now Sarah was scrambling. Tom wasn't sticking around to go down with her. He packed up the kids and left, moving in with his parents until things settled. But things weren't settling, they were falling apart fast. Sarah went to the last people who might help her, my parents. She begged them for money, anything to make this go away. But they didn't have enough. Then the final humiliation, the judge at a pre-trial hearing. Sarah tried one last pathetic defense, claiming she had no idea the documents were forged and that it was all a misunderstanding. The judge shut it down immediately. "If you don't cooperate, you will face major consequences," he said. That's when Sarah finally cracked. In open court, in front of everyone, she confessed. And just like that, she threw my parents under the bus. Sarah's confession didn't just seal my victory. It set off a chain reaction that completely destroyed my parents' carefully crafted image. Under oath, Sarah admitted everything. She told the court that my parents had been the masterminds behind the fraud. They were the ones who forged my signature, who pushed her into selling the house, and who assured her that I would never find out. With that single confession, my parents lost everything. Then Tom turned on her. He had been keeping his distance ever since things started falling apart, but now he saw his chance to escape. He filed for separation the very next day, publicly blaming Sarah for dragging their family into this mess. Sarah had no support left. Then my mother tried to pull off one last lie. She acted shocked, gasping, pretending she had no idea Sarah had done all of this. "We never knew about this. We would never do something like this to our own son," she said. but the financial records said otherwise. The bank records, the fake accounts, the money trail leading directly to them. It was all laid out in court. My father, silent up until that point, finally snapped. The moment the court confronted him with his direct involvement, he lost his temper. His voice boomed across the courtroom, shouting about how ungrateful I was, how I wasn't supposed to find out, how this was all just about what was best for the family. It was the worst thing he could have done. His outburst only made him look guiltier. Then the final nail in the coffin, the criminal investigation. The bank, realizing just how deep the fraud went, officially reported my parents for their role in facilitating Sarah's crimes. My mother couldn't take it anymore. She lost it in court, screaming at me in front of the judge. "You're destroying this family. You've ruined us." The judge had to tell her to be quiet. The rest of the family had seen enough. Aunts and uncles who originally defended my parents now turned on them completely. One of my uncles shook his head, disgusted. "You stole from your own son. We trusted you," he said. Sarah, meanwhile, got her final punishment. Her job fired her permanently. Her employer had been waiting for the court's decision, and after seeing the evidence, they blacklisted her from the industry. Then came the financial collapse, the legal fees, the court-ordered damages, the fraud investigation. All of it drained my parents' retirement savings. They went from financially secure to completely drowning overnight. Then Liam's testimony. He took the stand and, without hesitation, revealed that he had overheard my parents and Sarah laughing about how I would never find out. He was the final blow that ended their credibility completely. Tom, meanwhile, didn't even pretend to care anymore. With Sarah completely ruined, he moved on immediately. He started dating someone new within weeks of filing for separation. Sarah had lost everything: her family, her job, her reputation, and in court, she broke down completely. She sobbed, realizing neither her husband nor her parents were going to help her. Then the judge looked directly at my parents and said the harshest words yet. "You stole from your own child. You should be ashamed." And finally the verdict: I won. I got my rightful inheritance, plus additional damages. Sarah, my parents, they were completely destroyed. Winning the court case didn't mean everything was over. If anything, the real fallout was just beginning. Sarah was the first to hit rock bottom. With no job and mounting legal fees, she had no choice but to sell her house, the same house she had bought using money from my stolen inheritance. The sale didn't even cover all her debts. With nowhere else to go, she crawled back to my parents. Tom didn't waste a second. He finalized the divorce immediately, took full custody of the kids, and made sure everyone knew he wanted nothing to do with her. He even posted on Facebook about leaving a loser behind, making sure everyone knew he had moved on and upgraded. Sarah had lost everything: her marriage, her kids, her home. But the fallout didn't stop with her. My mom's entire reputation collapsed. For years, she had built this image of herself as the perfect family matriarch, the caring mother, the wise elder, the one who held the family together. Now, nobody believed that anymore. Word had spread through the extended family, and no one wanted anything to do with her. At family gatherings, people avoided her. Old friends stopped calling. Even the relatives who had originally taken her side went silent when they realized she had been lying to them for years. Then my dad's health started declining. Between the stress of the lawsuit, the loss of money, and the embarrassment, it was too much for him to handle. He had always been the one who acted like he was in control, but now he had nothing left to control. And the family drama kept getting worse. The group chats exploded. Some relatives cut off my parents completely, refusing to even speak to them. Others demanded answers. Then came the money issue. A few uncles started digging through old records and realized that my parents had been deceiving them for years, borrowing money, promising to pay it back, then conveniently forgetting. Now that my parents were broke, the uncles wanted their money back, but my parents had nothing left to give. That's when my mom finally reached out to me. She was crying, sobbing, begging for financial help. I ignored her completely. Then she got desperate. She called my employer, trying to sabotage me. She told them I was unstable, that I was making a mistake, that I needed to be taught a lesson. My boss laughed her off. Then my dad made one last attempt. He sent me a handwritten letter, family should forgive. I threw it away. Then a cousin reached out with one last piece of news. Sarah was now being investigated for other fraudulent activities. Apparently, she had done similar things before, but now people were finally paying attention. At that point, I was done. I cut all contact, changed my number, and, for the first time in my life, I felt true peace. A year later, everything had completely unraveled for Sarah and my parents. Sarah officially declared bankruptcy. With no house, no job, and no reputation left, she was left with nothing. The court cases, legal fees, and debts had wiped her out completely. Tom, on the other hand, moved on fast. He finalized the divorce, remarried, and moved out of state with his kids. He made sure everyone knew he had nothing to do with Sarah anymore. He even posted a picture on Facebook with his new wife, captioned, "Sometimes you have to leave the past behind." Sarah wasn't even a footnote in his life anymore. My parents, they lost their home, with their savings drained from legal fees and no financial help from anyone. They couldn't afford their mortgage anymore. They were forced to move into a tiny apartment, far from the family they used to control. And the worst part for them? No one cared. The extended family had cut them off completely. They had spent years acting like the head of the family, manipulating people, playing favorites, and now nobody wanted anything to do with them. Then my mom tried one last stunt. She started posting on social media, talking about how family should stick together, how she had been betrayed by her own child, how she only ever wanted what was best for everyone. Nobody bought it. The comments were brutal. Some relatives called her out directly, saying she was only a victim of her own actions. Others just ignored her completely. Then my dad finally gave up. After a year of failed attempts to reach out, he just stopped trying. No more letters, no more messages, nothing. And Liam, he was thriving. He cut off all contact with his parents, moved into his college dorm, and was doing better than ever. Then came Sarah's final humiliation. She got caught in another scam. Even after everything that had happened, she still tried to pull another shady deal. This time, she wasn't so lucky there was enough evidence to charge her, and now she was facing potential jail time. As for me, I used my rightful inheritance to buy my dream home. For the first time, I was completely free of my family's mess. Then my mom made one last attempt at contact. She sent a letter, "We still love you." I didn't bother responding. Then Sarah had the audacity to call me. She actually begged me for money. I laughed and hung up. My dad, he tried one last time. He wanted to meet up and talk. I blocked his number. A cousin later confirmed it. My parents were completely broke, and they were still blaming me. The truth? I had zero regrets. They did this to themselves.